years ago, around 24,000 Liverpool supporters travelled to Sheffield for an FA Cup semi-final against Nottingham Forest. It should have been a celebration of the very best that English football had to offer. Two fine teams led by giants of the game, tussling for the right to play at Wembley against a backdrop of beautiful spring sunshine. Instead, the day descended into tragedy. 94 fans died on that day after a catastrophic overcrowding in the Leppings Lane end of the stadium led to a crush. 3 more later died of injuries sustained that afternoon. Hillsborough changed everything for the families of those who died, the survivors who were traumatised by what they saw, and for English football more widely, although shamefully, the battle for justice was only just beginning. The fight for justice took 27 years and was a long, emotional process for those involved. So, while I'm aware most of you have probably heard about this tragedy, I think most of us don't know just quite what really happened that day at Hillsborough. So, in this video, we will explain what unfolded, how it occurred, and the aftermath of Hillsborough. Thank you to my channel members who voted to see this video made, and just a disclaimer, this is for educational purposes, and I'm not trying to do this for views or anything. I just want to raise awareness on one of English football's most impactful events. So, without further ado, this is the Hillsborough tragedy explained. It's 1899. Liverpool were the defending champions of the First Division, having won the double the year before. Nottingham Forest were an English football giant at this point, with Liverpool and Forest battling Arsenal at the top of the league for the title. Both sides had made it to the FA Cup semi-finals after Liverpool beat Brentford 4-0 and Nottingham Forest beat Man United at Old Trafford 1-0. The other two teams in the semi-finals were Everton and Norwich, while Forest were drawn with Liverpool, meaning a spicy Merseyside derby in the FA Cup final could be on the cards. The FA Cup finals were scheduled for 15th of April 1989, and this would be the last year that both games were scheduled to be held simultaneously on a Saturday afternoon. The game would be held in neutral venues at 3 p.m, but not at Wembley, so two of the biggest stadiums in England were used. Villa Park for the Everton and Norwich game, the home of Aston Villa, whilst Hillsborough, the home of Sheffield Wednesday, was used for the Liverpool vs Forest game. The fans were very excited. Liverpool and Forest were two of the best teams in England, contesting a place in the FA Cup final. The match was of course sold out, meaning more than 53,000 fans from the two sides would head for Hillsborough for the 3 p.m. kick-off. Despite being a far larger club, Liverpool supporters were allocated the smaller end of the stadium, Leppings Lane. This was so that their route to the stadium would not bring them into contact with Nottingham Forest fans who were arriving from the south of England. Football crowds at the time had a reputation for hooliganism, and therefore strict segregation between fans was enforced. Fans began arriving at Leppings Lane at about midday. The entrance had a limited number of turnstiles, of which just 7 were allocated to the 10,100 fans, with tickets for the standing terraces. An important note is Leppings Lane was a standing terrace. There were no seats at this time. Once through the turnstiles, supporters would have seen a wide tunnel leading down to the terrace and signpost standing. As was common practice in grounds at the time, the terrace was divided into sections, or what was called at the time, pens. They were sectioned off by high fences that put fans into blocks and separated them from the pitch. the sign for refreshments was bigger than the one showing the way to pens 1 and 2. There was no system on the day to ensure fans were evenly distributed across the pens, and there was no way of counting how many were in each pen. The match commander from the police was David Duckenfield. He was new in his post and had limited experience of policing football matches. Police expected supporters to find their own level by spreading it out across the pens in search of space, but this was difficult to do as movement between the pens was only by going through those narrow gates or climbing the very high fences. By 2:15 p.m, a crowd had started to build outside the Leppings Lane turnstiles, and it swelled rapidly over the next quarter of an hour. Progress through the 7 turnstiles was slow, and by 2:30 p.m, just 4,383 people had entered. That meant 5,700 ticketed fans were set to enter the ground in just half an hour before kick-off. The inquests were told Mr. Duckenfield and Bernard Murray, a police officer at the time, discussed delaying the kick-off to allow fans to enter, but decided against it. By 2:45, CCTV footage showed there were thousands of people pressing into the turnstiles and alongside a large exit gate called Gate C. This was in an attempt to get into the stadium, as kickoff was just 15 minutes away and these fans had tickets but were not allowed in the stadium. The funnel-shaped nature of the area meant that the congestion was hard to escape for those at the front. The turnstiles became difficult to operate and people were starting to be crushed by the thousands pushing through the turnstiles. The police officer in charge of the area, Roger Marshall, told the inquests he thought somebody was going to get killed here unless the exit gates were opened to relieve the pressure. He made several requests, and at 2:52, Mr. Duckenfield gave the order and the gates were opened. A note, the exit gate, Gate C, is essentially a massive gate that would allow thousands of fans into the stadium and access into the stadium. So the gate was opened and about 2,000 fans then made their way into the grounds. Most of those entering through Gate C headed straight for the tunnel, which led directly to pens 3 and 4, as there were no signs or police to tell them to go to pen 1 or 2. These 2 pens were the ones where all the other fans who had entered before through the turnstiles were standing. This influx of 2,000 people caused severe crushing in the pens. Fans began climbing over side fences into the relatively less packed pens to escape. The pen's official combined capacity was 2,200. It was later discovered that this had not been updated since 1979, despite modifications made to the grounds. 4,383 people were already in the stadium by this point, with the majority of those in pen 3 and 4, meaning the pens were already over capacity. Another 2,000 fans were about to join them in those pens, meaning the official capacity of the 2 pens, 2,200, was now going to have over 6,000 fans inside. At 2:59, the game kicked off. Fans in the 2 central pens were pressed up against the fences and crushed barriers. One barrier in pen 3 gave way, causing people to fall on top of each other. Those who survived told of seeing people lose consciousness in front of their eyes. Supporters continued to climb perimeter fences to escape, while others were dragged to safety by the fans in the upper tiers. At 3:06, policeman Roger Greenwood ran on the pitch and told the referee to stop the game. In the chaotic aftermath, supporters tore up advertising hoardings to use as makeshift stretchers and tried to administer first aid to the injured. The authorities' response to the disaster was slow and badly coordinated. Police delayed declaring a major incident, and staff from South Yorkshire Met Ambulance Service at the ground also failed to recognise it and call a major incident. The jury later decided this led to delays in the responses to the emergency services. Firefighters with cutting gear had difficulty getting into the grounds, and although dozens of ambulances were dispatched, access to the pitch was delayed because police were reporting crowd trouble. Only 2 ambulances reached the Leppings Lane end of the pitch, and of the 96 people who died, only 14 were ever admitted to hospital. So, that was how the day unfolded. The day was tragic enough, but the aftermath was even more painful to the families. Here is a timeline of all the events that happened after Hillsborough. As the disaster unfolded, Mr. Duckenfield told key people that a gate was forced open by Liverpool fans, a claim reinforced in briefings to the media. The lie goes around the world in TV and radio newspapers, take up the storyline pointing the finger at drunk and ticketless supporters. The Sun prints its now infamous front page alleging Liverpool fans had urinated on police officers and picked the pockets of the dead. In January 1990, a judicial inquiry is held into the tragedy. Lord Justice Taylor's report concludes the failure to close off the tunnel was a blunder of the first magnitude, and the match commander David Duckenfield failed to take effective control. His final report recommends a move to an all-seater stadium. This leads to a ban on standing at football matches, eventually imposed on all clubs in the top 2 divisions in 1994. Only now has safe standing been implemented back into football grounds in the Premier League and Championship. But if you ever wondered why Premier League stadiums are all-seaters, it is because of this. In August 1990, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the DPP, rules out bringing criminal charges against Sheffield Wednesday, Sheffield City Council, and the stadium safety engineers eastwards. It is a huge blow for the families who had hoped someone would be held accountable for the death of their loved ones. In March 1991, the original inquests into the deaths proved hugely controversial. Coroner Dr. Stephen Popper rules out any evidence relating to fans' deaths beyond 3:15 p.m. because by this time, he said, the damage was done, essentially saying that all 96 who died could not have been saved by the emergency services, clearing them of any potential manslaughter charges and essentially making them blameless for this scenario. This was strongly disputed by the families. November 1991, David Duckenfield is medically retired from the police on full pension, 2 years after being suspended from duty. A police doctor diagnoses him with severe depression and PTSD. March 1993, the 96th victim of the Hillsborough disaster, Tony Bland, dies after being left severely brain damaged by the crush. After nearly 4 years in a persistent vegetative state, his life support is removed after a legal battle. He was 18 at the time, but 22 when he died. December 1996. Hillsborough, a controversial drama documentary by acclaimed Liverpool writer Jimmy McGovern, reveals new evidence claiming some of the 96 were still alive after 3:15 p.m. Researchers also tracked down Roger Hounsworth, the stadium's video technician, who said it should have been obvious to police that the pens were very, very full when Gate C was opened. February 2000. In a bid to hold someone criminally responsible for the deaths of the 96, the Hillsborough Families Support Group begins a private prosecution. David Duckenfield and his deputy Bernard Murray are charged with manslaughter and misconduct in public office. The jury finds Mr. Murray not guilty, and after they failed to reach a verdict on David Duckenfield, the judge imposes a stay of prosecution, which essentially means David Duckenfield would be exempt from facing a re-trial. April 2009. At the 20th Hillsborough Memorial event at Anfield, fans heckle the then Culture Secretary and Andy Burnham, demanding justice for the 96. Their anger prompts the MP to join calls for any information held by public bodies on Hillsborough to be made released. A 140,000 signature petition forces a House of Commons debate, leading to the full disclosure of 300,000 documents relating to Hillsborough. January 2010. The Hillsborough Independent Panel, the HIB, is appointed to review this previously unseen evidence. September 2012. After reviewing the documents for 2 years, the HIB publishes a damning report into the tragedy. It is highly critical of the emergency response by a number of organisations and blames senior officers for opening the exit gates without thinking about what would happen. September 2012. The former Sun editor Kelvin Mackenzie offers apologies to the people of Liverpool for blaming fans for the Hillsborough tragedy. He says, "I published in good faith and I'm sorry that I was so wrong." Trevor Hicks of the Hillsborough Family Support Group says it was too little, too late. December 2012. The High Court quashes the original inquest verdict that had stood for more than 20 years. Lord Chief of Justice also orders new inquests after the HIB report said 41 of those who died may have been saved if emergency services had acted quicker. The then Home Secretary Theresa May announces a new police inquiry into the disaster. March 2014. The new Hillsborough inquests open in Warrington and last for 2 years, the longest inquest in UK legal history. March 2015. After 6 days of questioning, David Duckenfield admits his failure to close a tunnel before opening Gate C was the direct cause of the deaths of 96 people. Under pressure, he said he froze and failed to consider the consequences of allowing thousands of fans into an already packed terrace. April 2016. The Hillsborough inquests conclude the 96 who died in the 1989 disaster were unlawfully killed. Jurors agree fans played no part in the deaths and instead blame police failures, stadium design faults, and a delayed response by the ambulance service. Match commander David Duckenfield had a duty of care to fans in the stadium that day, the juries declared. They was in breach of that duty of care, that this amounted to gross negligence, and that the 96 victims were unlawfully killed. The jury also concluded police errors caused a dangerous situation at the turnstiles. Failures by commanding officers caused a crush on the terraces. There were mistakes in the police control box over the order to open the Leppings Lane exit gates. Defects at the stadium contributed to the disaster. There was an error in the safety certification of the Hillsborough Stadium. Police delayed declaring a major incident, and the emergency response, including the ambulance service, was also delayed. June 2017, the Crown Prosecution Service announces David Duckenfield is to be charged with manslaughter by gross negligence of 95 people. Under the law at the time, there can be no prosecution for the death of the 96th victim, Tony Bland, because he died more than a year after his injuries were caused. June 2017, 5 other men also faced charges. Former Sheffield Wednesday club secretary Graham Mackerel is charged with safety offences. Former police chief inspector Norman Pedersen is charged with 4 counts of misconduct in public office. Former police solicitor Peter Metcalf and former officers Donald Denton and Alan Foster are charged with perverting the course of justice. In June 2018, the order imposed in 2000 preventing David Duckenfield from being tried on charges relating to Hillsborough is lifted. However, in August 2018, all charges against Sir Norman Pedersen, who was accused of trying to blame Liverpool fans for the disaster, are dropped because of insufficient evidence. In January 2019, the first Hillsborough trial begins at Preston Crown Court. Hillsborough match commander David Duckenfield denies the gross negligence manslaughter of 95 Liverpool fans. Graham Mackerel denies 2 health and safety offences, one of which is later dropped due to lack of evidence. April 2019, the jury fails to return a verdict on the manslaughter charge against Mr. Duckenfield. Prosecutors say they will seek a retrial. Jurors did find Mackerel guilty by majority on a health and safety charge relating to the adequate provision of the turnstiles on the day. November 2019, after a 6-week trial at Preston Crown Court, David Duckenfield is found not guilty of the gross negligence manslaughter of the 95 Liverpool fans. In May 2021, Mr. Denton, Mr. Foster and Mr. Metcalf are also found not guilty of perverting the course of justice. So, that brings us to 2024. 35 years after Hillsborough, no individual has been found guilty for the death of the 97. David Duckenfield has been trialled twice and twice been found not guilty. While it has been declared the 97 were unlawfully killed, nobody has been put behind bars for this day, meaning the families still do not have justice for their loved ones. It's been a long fight for justice, and while some steps have been made, no closure has been brought to the families. Meanwhile, some positives to take from this tragedy was the ban on standing in terraces in the Premier League and much greater organisation from police at stadiums, with more legislation put in place to prevent overcrowding. And luckily, in England, nothing as tragic as Hillsborough has happened since. However, that does not negate the fact that this was a completely preventable tragedy. Those 97 died that day due to poor organisation from the police, delays from the emergency services to react, and poor stadium designs. 4 signs to show where pen 1 and 2 were contributed to this. Only having 7 turnstiles for 10,100 fans was another failure from Sheffield Wednesday's stadium design. The lack of coordination by the police at the turnstiles, no police controlling or counting how many fans were in each pen, no police stopping fans from entering the overcrowded pens, the police opening gate 7 to allow 2,000 fans into an already overcrowded pen, the failure to close the tunnel, the police not getting the game delayed, the police ignoring calls from the turnstiles for help to control the overcrowding, the police not declaring a state of a major incident, the emergency services not arriving quick enough, and the emergency services not being allowed to enter the stadium straight away due to the police trying to get rid of some angry fans. All were the main reasons why the Hillsborough disaster occurred. So as you can see, it's pretty clear to see that this was nothing to do with fan trouble or fans crashing into turnstiles, charging into the stadium, drunk ticketless fans. This was because the police failed to do their job and organise fans into sections, and when they failed to do this, and an emergency was clear to see, they did not react quick enough. The fact nobody from the police has been found guilty for the events that unfolded that day is a disgrace, and the fight for justice for the 97 continues. 35 years on, the pain of that day, April the 5th, 1989, still has no ending. So there we go. That is the Hillsborough disaster explained. I hope you have learned some stuff about Hillsborough and what occurred that day. If you want to see more videos similar to this, where I, explain some of football's, darkest moments and events, then please do let me know. But if you have enjoyed this video, please leave a like, consider subscribing, and I'll see